Let's start talking about section 1.7, which is all about inequalities, including compound inequalities, but there is a separate section on absolute value. So we'll do the absolute value inequalities in section 1.8. We're just going to jump right into linear inequalities. We're going to look at the first example. 3 onto x plus 2 is less than 8. This should be a fairly easy thing for us to solve. The first thing we need to do is distribute the 3. That gives us 3x plus 6 is less than 8. Then we subtract 6 from both sides. 3x is less than 2. Divide both sides by 3. When I divide by 3, do I have to flip the inequality side, or does it stay less than? It stays less than. When do we flip it? There's 2 times you flip it. When you divide by a negative or when you multiply by a negative. So be really careful with both of those. If you divide or multiply by a negative, you flip the sign. Otherwise, we leave it. So the answer is x is less than 2/3. Now, back in Algebra 1, maybe even parts of Algebra 2, you might have written that in set notation, which looks like this. I'm not big on set notation because I'm trying to prepare you for calculus. So they use only interval notation. Unless you're specifically asked, I won't ever ask you for set notation on a quiz or test. I would like interval notation. The best way for most students to get interval notation is to make a quick graph. So you don't always have to graph, but if it does say graph, you should. But if we were going to graph this inequality, we'd put a number line, and we would put a parenthesis or a bracket at 2/3. Parenthesis. Some of you might say open circle, but here we typically use parenthesis for open circle, bracket for closed circle. So we're going to put a parenthesis at 2/3 since there's nothing underneath the less than sign here. Now 2/3 lives between 0 and 1. It really lives closer to 1. So even though I'm not going to put an actual dot there for 2/3 or a slash, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a parenthesis there. I'm going to face it this way because I'm going to go backwards to everything less than 2/3, and that's what I'm going to shade. So that's how we would graph it. And the reason I graph them is so that I can look at it and I can see the interval without getting confused. Remember that this end of the number line represents negative infinity. This end of the number line represents positive infinity. When we write in interval notation, we just simply write what's shaded from left to right with a comma in between. So on the far, far left, it starts shading at what is understood to be negative infinity, comma, and it stops shading right here. What number was that? 2/3. Okay, and we know that 2/3 gets parentheses because it did not have a line underneath the less than sign that came right before it. And infinity and negative infinity always get parentheses because you can never actually reach them or equal them. So they will always get parentheses. And that's our first example. Any questions right now?
We don't have to draw a graph unless it asks.
You don't have to draw a graph unless it specifically asks. However, I have a tendency to get this backwards if I'm not really careful, like the 2/3, which side does it go on, the left or the right? And should I put negative infinity or positive infinity? So I usually draw a quick graph anyway, even if it doesn't specifically ask. Other questions? Okay, let's take a look at another. So next we have -5 distributed onto x minus 2 is less than or equal to 20 plus x. The first thing we'll do is distribute the -5. That gives us -5x plus 10 is less than or equal to 20 plus x. Now I need to get all of my variables to one side and all of my constants to the other. I'll start by subtracting x from both sides and subtracting 10 from both sides. After moving the x's, I have -6x plus 10 is less than or equal to 20. Next, I subtract 10 from both sides, and that yields -6x is less than or equal to positive 10. And this is the part where we have to be really careful. Now we'll divide through by -6, and when I divide by a negative, my inequality sign reverses itself. It's the same as changing direction on your number line. Taking the opposite. So greater than or equal to whatever 10 divided by -6 is. I would like for you, unless WebAssign tells you otherwise, I would like for you to leave your answer as an improper fraction. What does 10 over -6 simplify to?
-5/3.
-5/3. So I would like for you to leave your answer that way. It's not particularly useful, however, in terms of graphing. So you might also, underneath it somewhere, just want to go ahead and write the decimal. -5/3 is the same as -1.67. Yeah, -1.6 repeating, or -1 2/3. That helps me know where to put this on a graph if I have to. So if I need to go and graph this, I know that somewhere in between -1 and -2, a little closer to -2, I will have a bracket because there is an equal to line here. So I will have a bracket and I will shade everything greater than that bracket. So I will put a bracket here and shade everything this way. And that's how we would draw the graph. Now I'm not sure if WebAssign uses open or closed circles, or whether it uses parentheses and brackets for this. But would it be open or closed? This one would be closed because there's an equal to line under it. The one before it would have been open. So it really doesn't matter. Different books do different things. I prefer the parenthesis bracket. Some people prefer the open closed circles. Then for our interval notation, we notice that here at -infinity, nothing is shaded. Nothing starts shading until right here, which is the -5/3 mark. So we'll open up a bracket there, comma, and head out to +infinity, which is all the way over here. And that's the interval solution. Okay, so we have an empty truck with the driver that weighs 4,350 pounds. If we load it with feed corn that weighs 31 pounds per bushel, and we drive it over a bridge that has a 10,000-pound load limit, we want to try to figure out how many bushels the truck can legally carry. First off, how many answers is this going to have? Anybody know? Okay, what's the question? We want to know how many bushels it can carry, right? Well, could it carry 5 bushels? 6? 7? Probably.
It could be from that number on.
Right, so it probably could carry a bunch, maybe even infinitely many if we allowed fractions of a bushel as well. So inequalities have most of the time infinitely many solutions. But there's usually one number that's really important because that's sort of where it all starts from. First, we need to set up an inequality. We know that it is going to weigh 31 pounds for every bushel. So do y'all agree that's going to be 31B? That's how much the corn is going to weigh? Plus what the truck and the driver already weigh, 4,350 pounds. And that has to be less than or equal to the load limit on the bridge. Then if we just solve that for B, that should tell us how many bushels we can legally carry across that bridge. First thing we do is we subtract 4,350 from both sides.
56.50.
And then we have 31 bushels is less than or equal to 5,650?
Yes.
5,650 pounds. Divide both sides by 31.
182.26.
And that means our bushels need to be less than or equal to 182.26. Could you round that, or is that?
258.
So it doesn't tell us what to round to, so let's just say 0.26. Okay? Now in this case, rather than giving a fraction answer, it really makes more sense to just go ahead and give it as a decimal. We don't really know what 5,650 divided by 31 is. So this makes more sense. So how many can he legally carry?
182.
He can carry up to 182 technically point about 26, right? Now, did you round up? Tell me the exact.
0.25.
182.2580645.
So it's anything less than that too.
So it should be anything less than or equal to exactly that. Which this technically is a little more. So technically we really shouldn't let him carry quite that. He actually needs to be less than that. Do y'all understand that? So probably just to be safe, let's say he could carry up to 182 bushels, right?
People like break the bridge by like a decimal.
So with word problems, you kind of have to be careful that you don't go over. You have to give your answer in something that'll make sense. Probably we're not going to let him carry a decimal of a bushel because we're going to sell the corn by the bushel, right? So we'll probably just round it off and let him carry up to 182 bushels.